Hey everybody, here's a quick status update on RetopofFlow 4 working inside of Blender's edit mode. This is specifically for the folks on Blender artists who are asking about what's been going on recently. And one of the reasons why we haven't had a lot of updates is the last few years, we've only had one main developer working on RetopofFlow, Dr. John Denning, and he's done an amazing job, but is only able to work on it part-time. And this last year had a few things come up personally that he had to handle, and so just wasn't able to work on the tool for quite some time. So that was unfortunate, but also we understand that that can happen to anybody. And the last couple weeks, he's been back and making some really cool progress. But also, we know that having one person working on the core of the tool is completely unsustainable. And so we've been trying recently to figure out how to handle that on limited resources. But we've recently been able to hire a new developer, JF Matthew, who you might recognize from he's the lead developer behind UV and has done a bunch of really cool things there when it comes to working with meshes and really low-level stuff, kind of hacking around how Blender works with tools in the tool shelf and some custom visualizations. And so if you want a sample of his work, check out UV. He's been working with us on that for, I think, over a year at this point and has done some really, really good work. And so he's the perfect person to also work on RetopofFlow. So we hired him very recently. He started on RetopofFlow last week, and the first thing that he's going to do is go through the backlog of RetopofFlow 3 issues that we haven't been able to get to yet, just some of the edge cases here or there that we're going to be fixing up. And so that's really good news because we're still going to be supporting RetopofFlow 3 for quite some time, making sure that it works with new versions of Blender and fixing bugs and things like that as they come up. And so if you are a RetopofFlow 3 user, we're not going to just completely abandon that for version 4, even though we are working on that as well. So in RetopofFlow 4, hopefully we'll see more updates happening as we go forward, but here's where we're currently at. So in an earlier demo, we already saw Polypen working, but right now Contours has been added, but isn't completely finished yet. You can see that the main algorithm does work quite well. We can change the number of cuts and make our little cuts like so. And it is working by walking around the mesh and is not working in screen space, so we can make a cut perfectly around the fingers, even though it's occluded from this angle. And all the things that you would expect from Contours are working great as the core algorithm. But one thing that isn't is that it's not being extruded in between these loops. And that's something that was working in a previous build, but then we started working on strokes, and then somewhere along the line it broke. And so we need to go back and fix that. So it's not really ready for testing yet, just because, the main use case for it doesn't work. But it's all been implemented. But as we're kind of changing the underlying structure of how some of these tools function, then it kind of breaks other stuff. And it's kind of like cleaning a closet. You kind of have to take everything out and put it back in, and you don't really want to invite people over while you're in the middle of that. But we're still heavily working on this. And, when we get this all fixed up, then we'll put in a new build and you guys can all test it. So Contours mostly there, but, has a few things that we need to fix before putting out a new build. Polypen, we already showed, but I'll show you where we're at with that as well. Let's look at a higher poly mesh. If we hide our hand, let's go to our lion statue. Here we have about 4 million triangles. So this is around the point where RetopofFlow 3 would start to struggle a little bit. So if we tab into edit mode here, look at Polypen. Contours on, a mesh of this size is a little bit slow. Like there's a tiny bit of lag, as you can see here, actually quite a bit in this case. But remember that it's also walking all the way around the mesh itself. So it's taking into account every single face that it hits. And so that's just inherently going to be a little bit slower. Maybe we can do some projection in some cases to speed that up. But at the moment, if you're working on the super high poly mesh, that is going to be a little bit slower. But as you saw with the hand, anything that's, a normal character sculpt should be quite fast. So that's something that, we need to take into account. But for a first version, it is working. Polypen, as you can see here, since, we're just projecting from screen space super fast, there's no lag. Blender's handling the snapping. Blender's handling the retopology overlay, both of which Dr. John Denning worked on helped work on for the Blender Foundation. And so he implemented some of the snapping from RetopleFlow into Blender itself. And so we're able to do some of this stuff without, custom code, which unloads a whole bunch of the speed issues and just makes it much faster because now it's just working in C instead of Python. Also, the retopology overlay, he helped start. He wasn't the person who finished that up because his time was up at the Blender Foundation before he could do that, but another person picked that up and finished it a few versions ago. And so this is just working great inside of Blender, and we don't have to do any custom drawing for the main geometry, which removes basically all of the lag that was plaguing us in RetopleFlow 3. So you can work really, really fast in RetopleFlow 4 in edit mode, regardless of how many vertices you have. One thing that's really nice in PolyPen in version 3 in version 4 as opposed to version 3 is that you can just left click and drag to tweak vertices. So instead of having to select and then tweak, you can just click and drag and tweak. This works on vertices and on edges. So it's really, really fast to work with. And I love seeing this just in Blender's edit mode. So much faster, so much easier to use, and I'm excited to get this out there. The PolyPen demo is already out. If you want to get that, I'll put a link in the Blender Artists thread to where you can download that if you want to check it out. But some of these functions in these other tools aren't quite working yet, and so that's why we haven't put out a new build in a while. You can see here in PolyPen, quad mode is also working great. You just extrude quads very easily. The snapping is working well. So everything's about the same with PolyPen as it was for RetopleFlow 3. Knife also mostly works. You can see here. There's a few edge cases where it doesn't work, where we just need to make it more, context sensitive. For example, if we have a selected edge, it doesn't understand that that's trying to make a cut. So a few things here or there that we need to clean up, but for the most part, it is working as intended. So that's PolyPen. Strokes is something that was just implemented pretty recently, so it's like most of the way there, but not quite. So it draws out patches of quads perfectly, just like in RetopleFlow 3. We can just keep drawing like so. You can change the number of counts for the cuts. One thing that isn't working quite yet is the scroll. It was a shift scroll in RetopleFlow 3. I think we're going to change that to a control scroll so you don't have to switch hotkeys as you're drawing. But either way, the actual scrolling to change the number of cuts isn't quite working yet. We need to figure out some stuff with Blender's redo system in order to make that work smoothly, but that will be coming. But for now, you can change it in the redo panel. And we also have a couple new options for strokes, which is pretty cool. If we make a stroke like this, before, of course, we could make a parallel stroke, or we could also make a perpendicular stroke starting from one of the ends, like that. But what we could not do before is make a T-shaped stroke starting from one of these middle vertices. But now that works just fine. So really, really helpful in case you're working with the middle of this. But another thing is that we have a new extrapolation option, because in RetopleFlow 3, everything was extruded in a straight line, but now we can choose adapt, and it tries to intuit the curve of the rest of the vertices of that final stroke based on the curve of the original. So this is specifically helpful if we have a really strong curve. And another thing that doesn't quite work is closing loops entirely. You can see it doesn't quite... Oh, that one actually did merge. Okay, cool. But this isn't like completely finished, because if we draw out, it doesn't do anything. So still a few things to work on there. But let's say we have a curve that's kind of like that. Let's do something like there. What we can do now with the T-shaped strokes and the adapt option is we can just draw out from one of these vertices and create a ring all the way around. So this is really fast to work with and really, really nice. That way you don't have to make a stroke all the way around like that. Instead, you can just kind of extrude, boom, and be done. So before flat, that would just kind of create garbage. But now with adapt, that works really, really well. So we want to do a couple other things like that to make things more, context sensitive or intuitive to use. So, but I think we'll do that after we finish the initial implementation. because there's a few things that still don't work that we just haven't gotten to yet that should be pretty easy, but we just haven't gotten there. One of those things is if we have part of this line selected, we create a patch of quads, and then let's say we select this edge loop and extrude it along this line, it doesn't snap those vertices and kind of inherit that curve, which is something that we still need to do. So that was something that was pretty foundational in RetoboFlow 3. So that definitely will be there, but we haven't gotten to that part of the tool yet. So a few things like that are still kind of not quite working, and that's why we haven't put it out for artists to use, is because we still have our to-do list that we know we need to do first. That's all very important stuff, and so we want to get that at least working as we think it should, and then let you guys use it and give us feedback. But we're not quite ready for that feedback yet because it's pretty obvious what's not working. Also, another thing that's not quite working is relax. That's something that was working in a previous build, but again, some changes to polypen and strokes, it just stopped updating. And so once we get back to working on relax, that should be a pretty easy fix. But again, haven't quite gotten there. All the tools or all of the algorithm options have been implemented. I cleaned up the UI a little bit, so it's using the new panel system and all of that. So it's all here, but just currently isn't updating as we draw, so not really useful to test. But once we get relax fully working, then tweak should be super easy because it's essentially the same thing, but just moving vertices in a different way. So once we get relax and strokes working as it should, the rest of the tools should be quite quick to work on. So that's the current status. As soon as we have a new build, as soon as we kind of fix all of these other little things, then I'll put out a new one. Again, if you want to get the current polypen demo, then I'll put a link below and you can get that. And if you want to get future updates while it's still in alpha and in beta, then you can sign up for the email list at orangeturbine.com. And whenever there's something new to test, then we'll just send it out there and you can try it for free. So that's where we're at. Thanks for watching.